Have you ever noticed how your silence threatens someone louder than their own anger? How your confidence irritates people who can't even stand alone in their own shadow? Some people don't hate you. They hate what your independence reflects back at them. You become a mirror they never wanted to look into. Independence is often celebrated as a mark of strength, clarity, and emotional maturity, yet it carries a hidden consequence that most people never openly acknowledge. It exposes insecurity in others. Not because independence is aggressive, confrontational, or loud, but because it silently disrupts the fragile identities built on external validation, control, and dependency. When you begin to stand firmly in your own truth, those who rely on your uncertainty suddenly feel threatened. Your growth becomes their discomfort. Your stability becomes their mirror. Independence is not merely the act of standing alone. It is the psychological declaration that your worth no longer comes from the approval of others. You stop asking for permission to exist. You stop begging for acknowledgement. You stop molding yourself into shapes that make others comfortable. And when this transformation happens, people who once felt superior, needed, or important suddenly feel the ground shift beneath them. They lose the influence they once held, and insecurity begins to surface within them. What intimidates them is not your independence itself, but what it reveals about their own dependence. People who have never learned to be emotionally self-sufficient depend on others to fill the emptiness within themselves. They need admiration, reassurance, attention, or dominance to feel relevant. When you break free from that dynamic, you unintentionally expose the fragility behind their mask. It becomes impossible for them to hide the parts of themselves they refuse to confront. The moment you stop feeding their need for control, their carefully curated identity begins to crack. Independence functions like a psychological spotlight. Without saying a word, you illuminate what others have kept in shadow. Someone who has spent their entire life manipulating others now finds themselves powerless in front of someone who cannot be controlled. Someone who has always relied on emotional chaos sees your calmness as an attack. Someone who has always survived by extracting validation suddenly feels invisible when you validate yourself. The exposure is not intentional, it is simply a natural reaction to the presence of genuine self-trust. The insecure rarely admit their insecurity. Instead, they project. They criticize your confidence, calling it arrogance. They label your boundaries as selfishness. They interpret your self-sufficiency as coldness. They attempt to distort your growth so they can protect their own fragile ego. But beneath the accusations is the deeper truth. Your independence forces them to confront the parts of themselves they have avoided for years. Your self-possession challenges their emotional immaturity. Your inner peace contradicts the turbulence they cling to. Your clarity reminds them of their confusion. Independent people trigger others because they break unspoken psychological contracts. Many relationships, friendships, and family dynamics operate on subtle power imbalances. Someone leads and someone follows. Someone gives endlessly and someone takes without guilt. Someone plays the rescuer while someone plays the helpless one. These roles create a delicate equilibrium. When you grow beyond your assigned role, you disrupt that balance. Those who benefited from your dependence feel threatened, even betrayed. They interpret your evolution as an act of rebellion rather than an act of self-respect. Insecurity thrives in environments where people remain predictable. As long as you needed their approval, their presence carried significance. As long as you needed their guidance, they felt wise or superior. As long as you needed their support, they felt powerful. Independence removes these illusions. It reveals who people are without the masks that dependency allowed them to wear. It shows who genuinely cares for your growth and who only cared for the version of you that made them feel comfortable. True independence challenges others to examine their inner world, and many people resist this confrontation. It is easier to blame the independent person than to face one's own emotional void. It is easier to criticize confidence than to admit a lack of it. It is easier to resent someone's strength than to build your own. This is why independence often triggers envy, competition, or hostility. Not because the independent person has done anything wrong, but because their very existence highlights what others have neglected within themselves. The most ironic part is that those who resent your independence could gain the most from learning how you achieved it. Instead, they often choose to protect their insecurity by diminishing your growth. Independence becomes a threat, not because it harms them, but because it challenges the foundation of their identity. And for those whose identity is built on external sources, your self-sufficiency represents everything they fear they cannot become. Control is a delicate power. It doesn't always come from force, confrontation, or authority. More often, it comes from subtle influence, emotional pressure, expectation, fear, guilt, or dependency. People who rely on control assume that others will remain predictable, compliant, and easily guided. Their sense of security is built on the stability of this dynamic. But when someone becomes psychologically, emotionally, or spiritually free, the foundation of control collapses. And this is why those who control fear the free. Freedom is the one thing they cannot shape, bend, or contain. Freedom is not rebellion. It is not loud resistance. It is not defiance. Freedom is the quiet decision to reclaim ownership over your own mind and inner life. The free person does not need approval to feel worthy. They do not need direction to feel capable. They do not need someone else's emotions to dictate their own. This autonomy strikes fear in the heart of those who depend on control because their influence becomes irrelevant. Their power becomes empty. Their authority becomes meaningless. People who thrive on control need others to remain uncertain. Uncertainty keeps them important. If you don't trust yourself, you will trust them. If you don't believe in your own judgment, you will rely on theirs. If you fear standing alone, you will cling to anyone who promises guidance. So, when you break free from these psychological chains, it destabilizes the entire system they built. Your independence exposes their lack of genuine power, for control only works on those who allow it. Those who control fear the free, because freedom reveals the truth about the controller. Without someone to dominate, direct, or influence, they are forced to confront their own inner emptiness. Their identity was tied to being needed, being superior, or being obeyed. When you remove yourself from the dynamic, they must face the uncomfortable reality that the power they believed they held was never real. It was borrowed from your fear, your doubt, your silence. Free people are unpredictable to those who control. Control thrives on knowing how you will respond, what you will tolerate, what you will sacrifice. But a free person changes the entire game. They no longer react from fear. They no longer make choices from insecurity. They no longer prioritize someone else's comfort over their own truth. This unpredictability terrifies the controller because it means they can no longer manipulate outcomes. Your autonomy becomes their uncertainty. Many relationships, romantic, familial, social, quietly operate on the assumption that one person's voice is louder, one person's emotions matter more, one person's needs must be accommodated. When you liberate yourself from this, it feels like betrayal to those who benefited from your submission. They see your freedom not as personal growth, but as disobedience. They interpret your self-respect as danger. They label your strength as disrespect. This is not because you changed, but because that dominance no longer feels guaranteed. People who control others are not as strong as they appear. Their dominance hides a deep fear of losing relevance, fear of losing superiority, fear of losing the emotional leverage that kept others attached to them. Free individuals remove the illusion of superiority. They show that authority was built on fear, and once fear is gone, there is nothing left to hold on to. This is why freedom is so threatening. It invalidates the psychological contract that gave the controller purpose. A free person also reflects back everything the controller has avoided within themselves. Those who rely on control often struggle with their own insecurity, inadequacy, and inability to form healthy connections. They use dominance as compensation. But when you step out of their influence, your freedom highlights their dependence on power. Your self-trust contrasts their inner doubt. Your emotional strength reveals their emotional fragility. This reflection is painful, and instead of confronting it, they often attack the one who reflects it. Freedom carries a natural boundary that cannot be manipulated. You no longer react to guilt. You no longer respond to intimidation. You no longer bend to emotional pressure. This is intolerable to someone who has used these tactics for years. Your refusal to be controlled feels like rejection. Your clarity feels like rebellion. Your peace feels like an accusation. They cannot control what they do not understand, and that they do not understand someone who no longer fears them. What truly scares the controlling person is that once you taste freedom, you can never return to dependence. You cannot unlearn self-respect. You cannot unsee your own worth. You cannot forget what it feels like to choose yourself. And once their influence no longer shapes your decisions, they no longer hold a place of power in your life. This is the loss they fear most. The loss of the ability to shape your identity, dictate your choices, or define your path. Inner strength is one of the most misunderstood forces in human relationships. People often assume that strength is admired, respected, or universally appreciated. But the truth is far more complex. Your inner strength does not simply inspire others. It reflects them. It becomes a mirror exposing what they hide, what they suppress, and what they fear within themselves. And because many people are not ready to face their own inner world, your strength becomes a source of discomfort, resentment, or confusion. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because your presence silently reveals the truths they avoid confronting. Inner strength is not loud. It does not boast. It does not demand attention. It is quiet confidence, emotional stability, and self-trust that radiates without needing validation. This kind of strength does not need permission. It does not chase approval. It does not collapse when challenged. And it is precisely this quiet power that magnifies the insecurities of others. People who have never built their own inner stability feel exposed in the presence of someone who has. without intending to. Your energy reveals the cracks in their foundation. Your strength shows others where they lack strength. Your clarity shows others where they are confused. Your self-respect shows others where they have compromised themselves. This reflection is not always welcome. Many people construct identities based on illusions of control, superiority, maturity, or emotional intelligence. When someone with genuine inner strength enters their life, the illusion becomes harder to maintain. Authenticity naturally dismantles pretense. And for those who depend on pretense, this is deeply unsettling. People often project their unhealed wounds onto those who trigger them. They accuse the strong of being intimidating, cold, or too much. They may claim that you are the problem, when in reality, your presence simply reflects the conflict happening within them. Your strength becomes a reminder of the inner work they have avoided. Instead of addressing their fears, insecurities, or emotional gaps, they attempt to bring you down to their level. This is not because they dislike you. It is because they dislike the version of themselves they see in your mirror. Inner strength carries boundaries that many find difficult to understand. When you stand firm in your truth, those who rely on manipulation feel powerless. When you refuse to be guilted, those who use guilt feel ineffective. When you respond with calmness, those who rely on chaos feel invisible. When you trust your own voice, those who depend on external validation feel questioned. Your strength does not just reflect people's insecurities, it disrupts their patterns, roles, and expectations. They can no longer interact with you in the ways that once gave them a sense of control or superiority. The mirror effect of strength is most visible in relationships where people are used to taking more than they give or expecting more than they offer. These individuals feel safest around people who are unsure, compliant, or easily influenced. When you rise into your strength, you break the dynamic they depended on. They can no longer mold you into what benefits them. They can no longer shape your decisions. They can no longer predict your reactions. The loss of this psychological power leaves them feeling insecure, even if they don't understand why. Your strength also highlights emotional immaturity in others. Someone who has not developed emotional intelligence may perceive your calmness as superiority. Someone who has never practiced self-awareness may interpret your clarity as criticism. Someone who has never learned self-discipline may see your consistency as a challenge. It's not your behavior they are reacting to, it's the internal comparison they cannot escape. You become the standard they secretly fear they cannot reach. Inner strength is transformative because it redefines relationships. People who value growth will be inspired by your mirror. They will see your strength as encouragement to develop their own. But those who fear growth will see your mirror as a threat. They will protect their ego. Instead of expanding their mind, they will resent the reflection instead of learning from it. Inner strength does not just reveal who others are, it reveals who they choose to be. When you embody strength, you remove the emotional fog that others hide behind. You make it clear who is genuine and who is performing, who is mature and who is pretending, who is grounded and who is reactive. Many people prefer the comfort of illusion over the discomfort of truth. Your presence eliminates that option. And for some, this is unnerving. Your inner strength, therefore, becomes a silent test that others do not realize they are taking. It does not compare, judge, or challenge, but it reflects with painful accuracy. The reaction people have to your strength often reveals more about them than about you. Some will admire it, some will grow from it, some will resist it, but all will see a part of themselves in it, because inner strength is not just a trait. It is a mirror that exposes the truth others work hard to hide. People often assume that validation is a harmless desire, a simple wish to be seen, acknowledged, or appreciated. But for many, validation becomes the foundation upon which their entire identity rests. They rely on it to feel worthy, to feel significant, to feel stable. Validation becomes their emotional oxygen. Without it, they feel invisible, insecure, or irrelevant. So when someone enters their life who does not need approval to function, who does not chase external praise, who stands whole within themselves, it creates a psychological tension they cannot easily handle. Those who rely on validation often reject those who don't, because the contrast threatens the very core of their identity. People who depend on validation are tethered to the perceptions of others. Their self-worth fluctuates based on attention, admiration, or approval. They shape themselves to fit what others expect, sacrificing authenticity for acceptance. This dynamic allows them to avoid confronting their own inner emptiness, because as long as someone is praising them, they can pretend the emptiness doesn't exist. But when they meet someone who is not moved by external validation, they come face with a reality they have been avoiding, the reality that true worth must come from within. A person who doesn't rely on validation disrupts the emotional economy of those who do. When you are self-assured, their strategies for connection do not work. They may try flattery, but you don't depend on it. They may try approval games, but you don't play them. They may attempt subtle manipulation through attention or withdrawal, but it doesn't influence your sense of self. Your inner stability exposes the hollowness of their validation-driven behavior. Instead of feeling inspired, they often feel threatened, because your independence highlights their emotional reliance. People who depend on validation seek relationships where approval can be exchanged, where there is an unspoken expectation that both parties will give each other the emotional feedback they crave. But when they encounter someone who doesn't need to be admired, someone who values truth over praise, that equilibrium breaks. They cannot predict your reactions. They cannot sway your decisions with approval or disapproval. They cannot control how you see yourself. This loss of psychological leverage creates discomfort, and discomfort often transforms into rejection. Your ability to validate yourself confronts them with their inability to do the same. Your confidence challenges their insecurity. Your emotional independence contrasts sharply with their dependence. Instead of addressing this internal conflict, many choose a simpler path, distancing themselves from you or dismissing your personality altogether. They may claim you're unapproachable, arrogant, distant, or too confident, but beneath the surface, the truth is that your self-trust exposes their lack of it. Validation-dependent individuals often craft identities that revolve around being liked. They adjust their behavior to fit what others desire. They build social personas, sometimes multiple, depending on the environment. Your authenticity disrupts this performance. When you exist unapologetically, without seeking approval, it reveals the artificial nature of their identity. They feel naked in comparison. Instead of acknowledging this disparity, they may reject you, resent you, or attempt to diminish you, so they don't have to confront the truth. People who rely on validation also fear losing influence. Validation is a tool of connection for them. They believe admiration creates closeness, approval maintains relationships, and external affirmation creates value. When you don't respond to this dynamic, they cannot bond with you in the way they are accustomed to. Your self-assurance makes them feel like they have no emotional currency to offer. This can trigger feelings of inadequacy, and instead of growing through the discomfort, they emotionally withdraw or reject you altogether. Self-sufficient individuals do not depend on others to define them. They choose relationships based on authenticity, not approval. This confuses those who rely on validation because they interpret connection through the lens of being liked or admired. Your independence challenges the rules they've lived by. They cannot understand a person who stays true to themselves even when misunderstood. They cannot comprehend someone who chooses integrity over acceptance. Your presence becomes a contradiction to everything they believe gives people value. Your self-worth reflects back to them the internal work they have postponed. It reminds them that they are vulnerable, that their identity is fragile, that their sense of worth is borrowed rather than owned. Many people reject what makes them uncomfortable, even if it's good for them. It feels safer to resent a self-reliant person than to learn how to become one. The rejection you face from validation dependent individuals is not truly about you. It is about the emotional ecosystem they have created to survive. When your presence does not reinforce that ecosystem, they feel destabilized. They avoid you not because you are unworthy of connection, but because you do not support the illusion they depend on. And so in their fear, discomfort, and insecurity, they reject the very strength they secretly wish they had. Growth is a deeply personal journey, yet its impact is never limited to the person who evolves. When you grow, you change the dynamics of every environment you move through: relationships, friendships, families, workplaces, and social circles. Most people celebrate the idea of growth, but in reality, not everyone benefits from your transformation. Some will support it. Some will admire it. But many will feel threatened, uncomfortable, or even resentful. Your growth becomes a disruption, a shift that forces others to confront truths they would rather avoid. People are comfortable when you remain the version of yourself they know how to handle. They grow accustomed to the role you play in their life: the listener, the helper, the quiet one, the fixer, the forgiving one, the one who never asks for too much. Your old identity creates a sense of predictability for them. When you begin to grow, you outgrow those roles. You redefine the space you occupy. You begin to express boundaries, self-respect, needs, and truths that may not have existed before. This shift unsettles those who relied on the older, smaller version of you. Growth challenges the assumptions people have made about you. When you become more confident, those who benefited from your uncertainty feel uneasy. When you become emotionally stable, those who fed on your instability lose their advantage. When you become independent, those who relied on your dependence feel abandoned. Your transformation exposes the nature of the connection, revealing whether it was built on mutual respect or quiet exploitation. And for many, this revelation is uncomfortable. Not everyone wants you to grow because your growth requires them to adjust. Some people fear change, especially when it demands effort from them. They may have counted on you to stay predictable, to stay compliant, to stay quiet, or to stay small. Your evolution forces them to confront their own stagnation. Instead of growing alongside you, they may fight to pull you back into the place they feel safest. They may criticize your new habits, question your new mindset, or minimize your progress. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because your growth threatens the comfort they found in your old patterns. Growth also reveals hidden dynamics. A person who once felt superior may struggle when you rise to their level. Someone who relied on your emotional labor may feel abandoned when you begin to prioritize yourself. Someone who manipulated your insecurities may lose control when you heal them. Your transformation breaks unspoken agreements that were never fair to begin with. Some relationships were sustained not by mutual effort, but by your willingness to carry more than your share. When you stop carrying, the imbalance becomes impossible to ignore. Your growth forces others to confront their own reflection. It shows them what they could be doing, what they could be healing, what they could be improving, but haven't. Instead of seeing inspiration, some see a threat. They compare themselves to you and feel inadequate. They fear being left behind. They fear no longer being needed. They fear losing the emotional or psychological position your old self kept them in. And so, to protect themselves, they resist your growth instead of embracing it. Some people benefit from your wounds more than your wellness. They felt closer to you when you were broken. They felt powerful when you doubted yourself. They felt necessary when you needed their validation. As you heal, you no longer depend on them in the same way. This shift can feel destabilizing to someone who built their worth on being the one you leaned on. Your strength forces them to redefine their value. Many resist this challenge, clinging to the past version of you rather than adapting to the present one. Growth also brings clarity. You begin to see who truly supports you, who only tolerates you, and who quietly holds you back. You recognize false friendships, conditional loyalty, and superficial connections. This awareness alone reshapes your relationships. Some people do not benefit from your clarity because they preferred the version of you that could not see their intentions. As you become wiser, you become less manipulable, less impressionable, and less willing to accept treatment that drains your spirit. Those who relied on your naivety or generosity lose the influence they once held. Your growth is not a betrayal, but those who misunderstand growth may treat it as one. They may accuse you of changing too much, distancing yourself, or thinking you're better than others. In reality, you are simply shedding layers that never belonged to you. You are outgrowing spaces that kept you small, beliefs that kept you limited, and relationships that kept you silent. But for people who benefited from those limitations, your liberation feels like loss. They experience your progress as their imbalance, your healing as their inconvenience, and your strength as their insecurity. Not everyone benefits from your growth because your evolution requires them either to rise with you or to step aside. Many will choose the comfort of staying the same, and in doing so, they cannot walk with the person you are becoming